This is the College Football Connection podcast with Marty Jenkins and Alvin Reed on 101 ESPN.
Maybe you're in a fog because the NFL has decided to start its weekend slate of games out there in London in the early AM hours. Maybe you're in a fog because you were present or involved in the festivities in or around Vanderbilt last night. No judgment there. Goodness gracious. Or maybe like me, you're just bewildered in the grand scheme of things as to how that Week 6 slate of college football came to fruition. Goodness gracious. My name is Bradford Bruns. Regardless of the circumstances, welcome in to our latest edition of the College Football Connection, bonus overtime style on 101ESPN.com, as well as on the 101 ESPN YouTube channel. And let's jump right into it, because yesterday was supposed to have been, it was painted as the prelude, or really the calm before the storm, next week when you have Ohio State and Oregon battling for the first time Big Ten style, as well as a number of other different matchups across the nation. Whereas for this particular Saturday, we had one top 25 matchup of real consequence. Missouri, Texas A&M. Yes, we have to get into it. Just make peace with that realization right now. And yet, at the end of the evening, you reflect on the results and you are cognizant of the fact that for the first time since 2016, 5 of the nation's top 11 programs fall, some tumbling especially hard on the same day. How did we get here? How are we going to make sense of the latest edition of the Top 25 Associated Press poll to come out here in a matter of hours? Let's begin at the top, though, as we must, with that 11 a.m. kickoff in College Station. Boy, did the Aggies have ample ammunition heading into that game against the then 9th-ranked Missouri Tigers. Texas A&M having already knocked off Arkansas in really a hard-fought affair last weekend at AT&T Stadium. We knew about the defense's bona fides. You would expect as much with Mike Elko at the helm of your program, Bateman, a very formidable defensive coordinator as well. And yet MU, after a bye week, after a stretch in which you struggled versus Boston College as well as Vanderbilt, and we will get to the Commodores' latest exploits in a minute or so here. But you opted to add more fuel to the fire in the days leading up to this game in one of the most raucous environments in all of college football. With your quarterback, your senior QB, number 1, Brady Cook, saying that perhaps the sound that is brought, that is generated by the faithful at Kyle Field, doesn't necessarily measure up to what we get in a practice setting at Memorial Stadium during the week. Okay, questionable. Strike number 1, I don't know. But then your head coach, Eli Drinkwitz, almost doubles down in a sense, because he pays no mind whatsoever to the possibility that Texas A&M's number 1 quarterback, despite what you have seen over the past 3 weeks, Connor Wigman, sidelined for each of the past 3 contests with a shoulder injury, upper body ailment, that he had been working doggedly in practice to get back into shape to maybe participate in the festivities versus MU. No, he's pretty much calling his shot and challenging Texas A&M, saying that Marcel Reed seems to have the traits and the characteristics that really play better in the offensive coordinator Klein's scheme. Okay. I'm not even going to get into the blanket debacle between Theo Weiss and Lee, the cornerback, because it's happenstance. It's more of the story. It's more of right now what so many people are maligning the Tigers about, and that is the construction of narratives and press clippings. Because at this point in time, if you watched any portion, or you were unfortunate enough to watch the entirety of the contest yesterday morning and dragging into the afternoon, right now, you have to admit that after that 41-10 defeat at the hands of Texas A&M, Missouri doesn't look the part of a top 10 team, and it will assuredly drop from number 9 into maybe the early 20s in a matter of hours. Heck, it doesn't even look like a top 25 team, let alone a squad that entered this season with real, legitimate college football playoff berth aspirations. And many different pundits and prognosticators across the country, that's fine. They were adamant that Missouri was not deserving of that billing, of the hype, entering the season, I was on the opposite end of the spectrum. I will readily admit, I looked at this core cast returning, irrespective of the fact that, and yes, you have to make note of Darius Robinson, his departure to the NFL. He not only rallied that defensive unit, but the program, the team as a whole. He poured so much sweat, put so much equity into the institution overall. Cody Schrader, likewise. We know the story there. You had so many different, however, returning team captains and upperclassmen leaders, or so it seemed, returning in general, that you were not exactly alarmed by the manner in which the first quarter plus of this schedule played out. I kept waiting, personally, myself, when is the real MU squad going to show up? Because if that double overtime victory at home versus Vanderbilt did not serve as enough notice, as enough of a wake-up call, then what is going to do the trick? Maybe yesterday accomplishes as much. Maybe it doesn't. Because from the opening snap of that contest, you were physically and mentally manhandled. I do not care that on the Tigers' opening offensive drive, that initial flag was picked up, the one that should have been levied as a pass interference call possibly against Theo Weiss that would have worked out in favor of MU. I'm not even caring especially about the 75-yard touchdown reception of Luther Burdens that was brought back then. Why? Because the extenuating circumstances there, the reason as to why that would-be monumental play was called back, you had an illegal man downfield, and you can attribute that to the same degree of sloppiness and overall lack of execution that plagued this team throughout September and now is once there at the forefront in October. It's inexplicable. It is unacceptable for this team for the sloppiness like that to continue and to use Eli Drinkwitz, his own words, following the 41-10 shellacking at the hands of Texas A&M. It was flat out an embarrassment because you're never going to question a team's desire work ethic. You can't. You cannot quantify or qualify that. You are not there. You are not there in those shoes. But you can openly wonder about the approach. You can openly wonder about the apathetic beginning to that game. To wit, defensively, I'm not talking about offense right now. Corey Batoon and his squad, which came into the tilt, having surrendered an average of 12 points per game. That is a convenient figure to look at, though, when you shut out Murray State and Buffalo to commence the campaign. We understand that. There was no semblance of a pass rush. There wasn't even the motivation to blitz, let alone get exotic with some of those schemes and with some of those looks. So as a result, not only did the likes of Le'Veon Moss and Daniels in the backfield pound it down your throat and then get into the second level with ease, as we saw on the third quarter opening 75-yard touchdown run to really punctuate it. You wondered at the half, Mizzou had gone into intermission trailing 24-0. Will there be a response? What is going to happen? Well, there was your action, right? It was almost borderline unfathomable. The defense didn't get caught looking into the backfield to the same extent, but the secondary was incredibly exposed. It was incredibly vulnerable, and the person who had entered, I would contend, this fall in Toriano Pride, the hometown native coming over from Clemson, taking over as essentially your number one, wasn't even on the field for long stretches of time. Wigman is absolutely throwing it, slinging it all around the yard. You look up 60 minutes into the television broadcast, he had completed passes to 9 different receivers. That is distribution. That is the hallmark of an upperclassman who seized the opportunity. Texas A&M had so much motivation, and Texas A&M looks the part right now of a physical contender in this conference. Missouri, until proven otherwise, you can't even put this squad in the same sort of class, even remotely close. And speaking of getting burned, speaking of sitting for long stretches of the game, I'm left to wonder. I'm left with so many questions after this contest. I'm sure you are in the audience as well. Why is Luther Burden, irrespective of the decent totals at the end of the game, yes, the mammoth touchdown catch, it is wiped out, but 70-plus yards, he has the 70 receptions as well, 7 or 70, it really wouldn't have mattered there as MU struggled to such a degree. Theo Weiss, he has his 50-plus yards as well. Why is Luther Burden relegated to the sidelines on all of these long third and long situations. Why in the world is this offensive line getting absolutely blown up at the point of attack when you invested quite literally so much in this group? I'm not saying that you're a group of road graders through the first 4 tilts of the schedule, that they're going to push back against the Texas A&M defensive front to such an extent that you're even playing on even ground. But you have to do better. You have to do better by Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll. Give them an opportunity to get more than a combined 18 carries. And it also goes back to Brady Cook. It certainly does. I'm not going to rip on this young man based on the fact that he was under 50% as far as completion percentage was concerned in that 41-10 loss. But when you have consistently this season demonstrated a lack, an inability to complete relatively simple passes and patterns in the flat, intermediate, let alone going down the field and getting vertical with Bird and Weiss, Mookie Cooper, Marquise Johnson. Where are these guys? Yesterday, Texas A&M's pass rush, it's so ferocious that you're not going to consistently stretch that defense and win over the top. But that's why you have to, before you crumble in the pocket, be able to exhibit more awareness than we have seen so far this season. There has been a regression to some extent in that department. It is troubling. It is troubling for MU. And when you look at next weekend, flashing forward here, traveling on the road against UMass, you couldn't get out of that game. The Minutemen are who they are. Are you going to learn a lot about your program? No. Are you going to be presented with a gut check opportunity then? No. Yet the following week, when you return to Faurot Field and you have Auburn on the schedule in advance of Alabama, an Auburn team that was in the thick of it well into the second half versus Georgia just yesterday, you're going to see if we are talking about formally, at the end of the day, pretender or contender status for the duration of 2024. College Football Connection with you, bonus style, on 101ESPN.com and the 101 ESPN YouTube channel. We still have a couple of other developments to hit upon here. Bradford Bruns with you. And speaking of Alabama, speaking of Vanderbilt, the gauntlet of SEC foes, who exactly is rising, who consists of or makes up the cream of the crop, and who is down in that second to third tier status. It is becoming increasingly difficult to identify. At this point in time, Alabama, mere days after toppling Georgia, succumbs to Vanderbilt in that environment yesterday, an environment that has been maligned by Nick Saban, by various other insiders and experts on the subject. Give Pavia and his crew their flowers to bleed out the clock, per se, for the last 2 minutes and change of that game and hold on to the 40-35 advantage and come out on top. In hindsight, does it make Mizzou's victory a couple of weeks ago look a little better? I don't know about that, but I do know that that defense forced Jalen Milroe into 2 turnovers. He had turned the ball over twice over the previous 4 games combined, and the Commodores knock off the Crimson Tide. In addition, in the evening, perhaps more perplexing to me, the critical darling of late, the 4th-ranked Tennessee Volunteers. They go down 19-14 to Arkansas, the same Razorback squad that had lost to the Aggies the week prior. What's going on here? In whom can we really place any level of confidence right now? It's so topsy-turvy that yesterday when I left the studio following that matchup, Missouri and Texas A&M, I had basically resigned myself to the idea, to the realization that you're going to Tuscaloosa in a few weeks. You have Oklahoma in November. That game may not even be of consequence at that point in the schedule, because is Mizzou already going to be out of it? Now, you take 1 quarter, 1 half, for crying out loud, 1 game at a time right now, but is it over as far as your real postseason aspirations? And yet everybody is so jumbled up following the events again of last night that who exactly is left standing at the end of the day? Ole Miss rebounds against South Carolina. Texas, in a matter of an hour or so, is probably going to jump back up to number 1 in the nation. Some other squads off this week, like in Oregon, for example, probably benefiting because they were simply on the sidelines. It has never been harder to predict college football in this landscape, and the parity versus, okay, what are you actually gauging as far as real results? It's becoming increasingly hard to identify. Just a little snippet for you. Obviously, this weekend on the College Football Connection, we will dive into the full updated polls in the days to come with my cohorts, Marty Jenkins, as well as Alvin Reed. But thank you for spending some time with me on this Sunday. Breathe, relax. There's another game, another slew of games still to which to look forward in mid-Missouri. And Illinois also gets back in the saddle next Saturday versus Purdue, for that matter. Illinois likely to move up from its current post of number 24. All of the fun, all of the madness, all of the heart attack-inducing results, they are still around the corner. We have more than half of the campaign to go. Thank you for spending some time with us. Regardless, though, enjoy the remainder of your weekend, and we'll catch you next time.